Oh, good afternoon. So just a word to our two guests. That this talk is part of the Diploma Course. So the other members here present have been studying different subjects as we've been going along. And the two subjects that we're going to look at today are Involution and Evolution. I'm saying this because it would hardly be very easy for new people to come along and just pick up where we were. But I'll try to make it as user-friendly as possible. If you bear in mind that the students have done some studying on this subject, my task today is to help to clarify some points and to give you an opportunity to ask questions based on what you've been reading, so that your mind can be clear on what you've asked to understand. Once again, I'll remind you that the Diploma Course only looks really properly at principles, not at in-depth details. In all these subjects we could go into very great detail, and on some of them we have in other places. But in this course we're sticking to the principles, and only as much detail as we need to support the understanding of those principles. I need to start by reading a little piece. Theosophy affirms that the universe is a single whole, and that one life animates every part of it. All beings and all forms emerge from and have their root in the one universal life, the first cause of all cosmic creation, or emanation. Now, in the last subject, we looked at the creation of the cosmos, if you remember. And at that point we were actually really considering the third aspect of the Logos, which is Thohat, in creating the planes of nature, from the spiritual plane to the physical plane. We briefly looked at how that is accomplished and the cycles of activity which are involved in that. And that's all we needed to do in this course. Now we're looking at the same thing again in the subject of involution. And here we see that, as with a lot of this course, and a lot of basic theosophical knowledge, each time you study a different subject you'll find there's an overlap. For instance, a good example of this would be if you're studying karma, the law of karma, then when you come to study reincarnation you will naturally be looking at karma again, because karma operates over several lifetimes. And so we have this this thing that we are looking at the same things very often, but we're doing it from a different point of view. In this talk we're doing it from the point of the one life involving itself in the matter that Thohat created when it created the planes. When it created the planes, it created the matter of those planes. Now we're looking at the second aspect of the Logos, which we call Mahat, which is actually a universal mind, or the divine mind, the mind of nature. There's so many words for it, but basically it's mind, it's feminine principle, and it's mind. Through its action, through its evolutionary process, it becomes known as wisdom, divine wisdom, and it has other names then, such as Sophia. And so we have the word Theosophy, which is compound of Theos, which is derived from Theogonia, which is Greek for of gods, and Sophia, which is wisdom. So Theosophy actually means the wisdom of the gods, plural, not singular. We don't believe in a god, but we do believe in many beings with great power who issue forth at the beginning of a creation and remember it all from a previous time. So those are known in the mysteries as the gods. And so now it is the turn for my heart, the divine mind, the feminine principle, to actually start to occupy these planes, to use the matter that's there and to organise it into forms which it can take up residence within and express itself within and experience. So we can see this very simply on the physical plane, because the physical plane all around us is full of forms of very varying types, from stones to ants to human beings to trees and so on and so on and so on. All these are forms which are made out of the material of the physical plane, which the spirit, or that aspect of the spirit which is conscious, the divine mind, then occupies and experiences through. So your divine self is occupying your physical body, and it is experiencing the physical world and its fellow creatures through that interface, through the five senses. It's expressing itself also. So this is the process that's taking place in involution. What we have to do now is we have to consider this from its starting point, which is rather obscure. I used the example of physical forms just then because that's the simple side of it. We can see very clearly what I'm talking about. This is a body, this is made of physical material. This has been organised by Maha, by the divine mind, and then it is occupied by that. But when we start at the spiritual plane, where all this begins, you can't refer to a physical body. You can't refer to things as such. And here we have one of the very basic and important principles of this course and of Theosophy and of esoteric knowledge, and that is that everything that we perceive around us actually has its origins on the inner planes. Nothing has its origin here. Absolutely nothing has its origin in this world. Everything we see around us, and everything that we are, is an effect of causes that were laid down eons ago in previous cycles on inner planes. Our physical bodies are modelled on our astral bodies, which were laid down ages and ages ago. Those astral bodies were actually templates drawn from thought forms in the divine mind at the mental level. So this is the principle that everything we see has actually had its beginnings on the spiritual plane. What happens then is that is then taken a step further onto a lower plane where it's made more substantial. Then it progresses to a more dense plane still, where it is again more substantial. We're talking about going from the spiritual plane through the mental plane into the astral plane. By the time things get to these ideas get to the astral plane, they're getting feelings and substance to them, and shape and form. Then eventually they come into the energy world, and with the quantum world we call it, and then the physical world. But the complication arises from the fact that when this process starts, the beginnings of everything are so subtle that we would hardly recognise anything there at all. Imagine, if you can, the divine mind establishing itself on the spiritual plane and actually just moving in terms of energy on that plane. The material of that plane is so fine and so insubstantial that movement is hardly recognisable. But what is happening is archetypal patterns are being established at that level. And here is another principle, that everything follows the same patterns from their beginnings. So when you look at something on the physical plane, you can actually trace it all the way back to the spiritual plane, where it's the same pattern, but because it's so insubstantial, you can't see it as a thing. This is why I say this is a deep side of the subject, because you have to use your imagination and your intuitive skills here to try and imagine what a thing would be like at that level that it can't even be called a thing. Yet it's a movement, it's a differentiation, and what we're saying is that the matter of that plane has been moved and changed, however slightly, and therefore in that place, at that point, is different from the basic matter of that plane, which hasn't been affected. Does that make sense to you? It's a bit like saying, if I can draw us down to the physical plane for an example, it's like saying you've got a very still body of water, perfectly still, and a fly lands on the surface and then takes off again. That little tiny bit of energy that landed on that surface has caused a little ripple which will wear out, which will run out over maybe a few inches or a foot or so. The rest of the water hasn't been affected. But those molecules of water where the fly landed are different now to all the rest because they've been through a specific pattern. When things come down to the next level, which we would say proper would be the higher mental plane, what we're looking at is very vague, but nevertheless complete thought forms. So the divine mind now is projecting a thought into the mental plane, and there are hierarchical beings, elemental beings, who actually respond to that thought and hold it in an appropriate form. And so eventually we talk about thought forms, don't we? We say thoughts are things. We're referring to ourselves, aren't we? So when I think of an orange, it actually becomes a thing in the mental plane for a while. It doesn't last, it dissipates, because I'm not going to keep on thinking about it. But if I could hold my mind on the image of an orange, all the time that I'm holding it, it is there on the mental plane. And it's held in that form by elemental beings who respond to my will. So this is the process, you see. The other way around, it is the divine mind doing this, establishing archetypes. Now when we get down to the emotional levels of the mental plane, and where they coincide with the astral plane, we have a field day for psychiatrists, don't we, and psychologists, where they talk all the time about archetypes, or unconscious, say it better.
The unconscious they talk about.
The unconscious.
But they also, don't they say that there is an unconscious that we all share?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, it's not just our unconscious.
No. So here we are, you see, the archetype of a human being is shared by all human beings. And there are countless variations within that archetype. But they're allowed for within the, let's even call it the mathematics of that structure. So when evolution, we'll come to this later, when evolution reaches the point of humanity, it is actually displaying on a physical level a physical rendition of that archetype. And each human being is expressing a certain variation on that theme. So when you look at people, they've got slight differences, haven't they? I was on a train the other week and a man got up and he said, "Good God, have you come from," I don't remember what he said, some place I've never heard of. And I said, "No." He said, "Well, you've got a double then." But actually, you see, if we'd have put his version of me and me next to one another, we wouldn't be the same at all. But in his memory, it was close enough, and he thought, oh.
Like fingerprints.
Like fingerprints, yeah. Fingerprints, they say, and like genetic testing, they say 1 chance in so many million or something, because it will be repeated somewhere along the line. But this again is part of the evolutionary process that comes later, where form is taken as a basic template and then developed. So let's finish dealing with involution first, because what I'm talking about here is the involving of spirit in matter, and that's an easy way to think of what the word involution means as opposed to evolution. Involution means involving itself in matter. Spirit, the one, fragments itself into matter. It involves itself in matter, and in doing so it breaks itself up. It diversifies, it fragments. So when you look at now at the physical plane, which is the densest point of matter, you see countless billions of fragments of the Divine One. That one has now become so many you can't count them. Every atom is a spark of that Divine. How many atoms do you think you have in your body? Trillions. And each one is a being in its own right, which has a little piece of divinity within it, which is evolving. And eventually, in some time so distant that we can't even think of it, that little spark in an atom will be a human being. Because we weren't just invented like that. We've evolved to what we are from the most basic, simple spark of the Divine. And that is what the whole process is about. It's about the Divine involving itself in this process to unlock the potentials of all the aspects of itself. It's like the one being puts itself out into the many, and you could say, let's make it easier, the Divine Self is a flame, a beautiful flame. And what all this is, a spark thrown out from the flame. And as each spark feeds on material, and the material is experience, then they become little flames in their own right, until eventually all these sparks are now flames. This is an incredible concept. You imagine, creation is being filled with potential divine flames, which are, to start with, only divine sparks.
The scientists have discovered now, haven't they, an atom that is in every single thing. Did you not see that on television?
No.
A couple of weeks ago?
No.
Ago. They have discovered an atom that is in every single thing.
Everything that they can identify, yeah.
Higgs.
Oh, the boson. Oh, they haven't discovered it yet. It's a theory.
No, they have discovered it.
Where? At CERN?
Yeah. I can't
Did they do it at CERN? Yeah, I wasn't sure about that.
But I don't think that they are claiming that it is the Higgs boson. They're saying
yeah. Well, they were looking for it, weren't they?
Yes.
Definitely,
They
yeah.
have discovered it, yeah.
But what do you
They
think?
called it by a certain name by somebody that said that there was one. I can't remember the name, because you remember. Yeah. They've called it by his name.
Who's the?
Well,
I can't remember his name. Some
He
professor.
came up with the theory about
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Well, what do you
And
think?
they've done it in Switzerland in this great big tunnel or something.
So what do you think the Higgs boson is then?
if it's in everything, it's a divine spark, but they
No,
wouldn't be able to.
No, it's nothing, nowhere near the divine spark.
No,
You can't see the divine spark in a machine. It's 6 planes away. You know,
Yeah.
What science is working on now is the quantum levels of the physical plane.
But not
Not the astral plane, not the mental plane, not the buddhic plane, not the atmic plane, not the spiritual plane, not the monadic plane. That's where your sparks are, on the monadic plane. That's where they're thrown out from. That's what their true nature is. See, science is looking at this from the gross inwards, and it's like trying to penetrate this fog of mud, which is actually the physical stuff itself. You know, there's one of the most ancient gods of all human experience is Isis. Right? Now, Isis is said to be veiled. It's the veils of Isis, the 7 veils of Isis. Madame Blavatsky wrote a book, Isis Unveiled, didn't she? The veil is the physical world. Lying behind physical matter is what's lying behind the veil. But what scientists is doing is they're pulling apart the veil. Well, they'll get through eventually and look through the veil, but then they'll start all over again, because the pattern is going to repeat itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what the Higgs boson would be, in terms of the perennial philosophy and esoteric science, would be the background state of the physical plane, or what we call the etheric plane, which is the quantum world to science. That this is a structure and energy forces underlying and within and upholding the atoms. Now, each plane has at its very highest point a field. It's a bit like a carrier signal onto which a signal is broadcast. So when you put your radio on or your TV, your signal you're receiving is being transmitted along the carrier wave. Without that carrier wave, it would scatter. So each plane has a carrier wave called a kasha, which actually infuses the whole of that plane with a divine sort of note. And onto that note, then all these differentiations can then sit in their own proper places. So the Higgs boson, if it exists, if they can actually see it, would be part of that carrier wave of the etheric plane. They also call it dark matter, don't they? They say the whole of space is filled with dark matter. And what they're saying is we can see a lot of light matter, but we can't see dark matter because we haven't got dark eyes. But we can assume that because we only can see, a tiny fraction of things in space, and those things have to have something within which to move, otherwise they wouldn't be able to keep their form and their shape and their cohesion, then the background must be matter which is dark matter, because we can't see it. And then you call it Higgs boson, or you call it something else. The same principle. You and I have to have a world in which to live in. Atoms also have to have a world in which to live in. And that world, science is calling dark matter now. But don't let anybody tell you that's the astral or the mental or the spiritual. No, it's just part of the etheric. It's a pity, you see, that scientists can't accept more readily the ancient teachings, as in fact Einstein did. And it's rumoured quite substantially that Einstein, his copy of the Secret Doctrine was so well thumbed that they're saying, some people are claiming, that his EMC square was based entirely on what he read in there. And I could vouch for that, because you can find that kind of stuff in there. But science will only so far accept that which you can measure, quantify, and or express in mathematical terms. And that this is a problem now, because maths are going way beyond reality. They're putting figures in there that don't belong anywhere really, and they're coming up with answers such as 10 parallel universes. Where the heck did they get that from? 10 parallel universes? Is one good enough for them? Theoretically, it may be sound. It may be logical, and you may be able to put maths and equations to prove it or to display it. But it's nothing you can actually do anything with, is it? Unlike electricity and magnetism and chemistry and electronics, which is what they do best, really.
This is just another tiny breakthrough for science.
Yeah.
They're going to discover that behind that is another reality.
Yeah, and so on. And so on.
And on.
Yeah. Well, there's wrong with that, because that, we do need... civilization, in order to proceed, has relied heavily on science over the last few hundred years. And it's going to rely on it even more heavily in the future, because science has got us in such a mess, in a way, with the environment, that we need science now to get us back out of it again. Because we're not going to go back to living in caves, are we? I don't think so. No. So, this is the principle then. That which is cohesive and one and is divine, in pushing out into the planes of matter, actually breaks itself up into fragments of countless aspects of itself, which can then relate to each other. you go on, because you
I'm
want to say.
following a train of thought, Eric, and I have to ask the question
You go on,
to
then.
be able to listen to the rest. When you said just now, but the spark is, much further back in the other realms that we occupy, I always thought of the spark as being in my physical self as well. And are you saying that it isn't?
Well, you're paying attention, aren't you? Good for you, paying attention.
But what would you say it again, man?
Yeah, because I'll say it a different way. Because what is actually residing within each atom is the same thing that's residing within your body, which is you. Your spirit isn't in your body. Its consciousness is in your body, but your spirit is on the spiritual plane. Now it's the same with the atom. The spiritual spark that animates an atom remains on the spiritual plane, and it evolves there, but its ability to vivify matter is what it puts out. It's an emanation, if you like, a thread attached to every atom, where its own nature is transmitted energetically, but it remains where it is. This is why in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, "All this I create, yet I remain." The penny just dropped, didn't it? Yeah.
That explains something.
Yeah. So basically, you see, if I rang you up when I got home, and I start telling you, if you said to me, ring me up later and tell me how to get this program running on my computer. So I ring you up and say, okay, Greta, go to Windows, go to Start, go to Control Panel, go to, whatever, and you're following my instructions. Am I there? No, I'm at home, aren't I?
Yeah.
But I'm still making you do. So there's a line of connection there, which is actually, we used to be a telephone line, is now satellite receivers and transmitters, which is mad, isn't it, really? Because if I got my mobile out and rang your mobile, my signal would go to a repeater, up to a satellite, back to a repeater, and back to your phone. And if you're only a few feet away, that's technology, isn't it? Crazy. It'd be easy if I just said it to you. But you see, this is how we communicate over distance now. In a way, you see, life imitates life. There's nothing new in the universe. This remoteness of life, controlling life and animating life, we are doing now ourselves. We're remotely controlling things across the planet. We can control things in space now. We send satellites to Mars and so forth. You remember when we talked about the Avatar? Some of you have seen the film Avatar, some of you haven't. And that was a very good example, because the operators there in that world, did you two see Avatar? So basically, if you think of your spiritual self as the operator in the cocoon, and the consciousness being transferred to an avatar body, this is your avatar body. And if you just dwell on that idea, I went into it quite a bit before, so I won't go into it again, you can see very clearly what's happening. And it's the same with the atom. An atom is an avatar body of a spark of the spiritual divine. When atoms come together, they form molecules, which is a congregation of sparks of the divine. Now someone asked a very high person, what do these sparks look like at the divine level? Are they walking about? Have they got shapes and forms? And the person said, no, they have not. At the spiritual level, at the level of the monad, what is happening is a differentiation is taking place within that immense consciousness, like a thought in your mind. But it's a thought that lasts almost an eternity, whereas your thoughts and my thoughts only last a few moments. Nevertheless, it's based on the same pattern. So we're back to the same principles again. Everything follows the same patterns. There are so many patterns in creation, we call them archetypes, and everything follows those patterns and works out variations with them, and that's how we proceed. So time now we turned our attention to, I mean, this was only a look at involution. The study material you were given should have given you a more cohesive view of it. But I've skipped about a bit. I just want to inspire you really. I want you to see that this is a living thing. We can point to things outside and we can see that they started on the divine plane and now they're here. We don't have to go into the details of that. What we need to do now, though, is start on the other side of this equation, which is evolution. Now, evolution is when the many gradually become the one. So the one becomes the many becomes the one. And evolution, I don't want to complicate it because it can be very complicated, and I want to keep things very simple. Evolution at the human level starts with the human being, but at the cosmic level starts with the mineral kingdom, because the mineral kingdom is the furthest point from spirit which Maha reaches as it flows out into matter and organises it. It's actually the first thing it organises at the physical level is minerals, what we call rocks and dust and all that. And it has its...
So there are other planes.
Yes,
after
but...
that. After the mineral level.
No, before the mineral level.
Yeah, before.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But what we're saying now, we've done all that involving. It's only a sketch, you look at it.
Yeah.
At the end of that involution process, the stopping point, the terminal, is the physical world.
Yeah.
And in terms of Maha building forms to express and to experience in, those forms of the physical world is the mineral kingdom. Now, we need to understand also, and this is the subject of another talk later in the year, that Maha does this in 7 pulses, which we call 7 life waves, all of which go through this process one following another. We actually call them the kingdoms. So we've got the mineral kingdom, which is 1 pulse. We've got the vegetable kingdom, which is another pulse. We've got the animal kingdom, which is a 3rd pulse. And we've got the human kingdom. Those are 4 physically appearing life pulses of Maha. There are 3 behind the scenes still working their way towards physical matter, and those are the 3 elemental kingdoms. So we've got 4 kingdoms, 7 kingdoms in all, 3 on the inner planes and 4 on the outer plane. Right. Now the first of those 4 is the mineral kingdom. Now you could say to yourself, well, what good is the mineral kingdom to a divine mind? Surely it's a bit of a letdown, really, from being a divine mind to suddenly being, eventually becoming locked up in minerals and rocks and all that kind of stuff. But you see, this is what it's about. It's about experiencing, not experiencing. Maha's come out, got itself into this matter, which it is organised into the forms we call iron, copper, lead, zinc, limestone, granite, gold, eventually rubies, diamonds, crystals. This is an evolution taking place because it didn't all appear at once. Right? So when the mineral kingdom is forming, the elements form, and from these elements, in the mineral world of the physical plane, like in the earth itself, is what we're talking about, you've got volcanic action, you've got the earth's crust moving around, you've got magma flowing, you've got water flowing, you've got aridness, you've got ice, intense heat, you've got things grinding against each other. As these chemicals and elements and minerals are being produced, the catalysts are formed and they produce other things like precious metals. Diamonds are formed through pressure in carbon over a long period. This is an incredible process. If you look back over the age of the planet to where we are now, it's produced all these incredible materials out of the basic matter which Fohat had made, which was undifferentiated really. So the divine mind, Mahat, is residing in the mineral kingdom. It's experiencing this incredible pressure of minerals, the heat and the grinding, and it's producing what it can from that basic template. It's evolving and creating as much evolutionary improvement and diversification as it can. You see this everywhere. The vegetable kingdom is so diverse. It's not just a few fern trees, is it, like it was billions of years ago? It's got a lot of fern trees. Now there's so many different plants. You can't categorize them all. So this is what life does. It doesn't just go and do something. It does everything it possibly can with that thing. It doesn't just make a human being. It makes billions of different kinds of human beings with different temperaments and different attributes. So in the mineral kingdom, it's doing the same thing. That's why we got such a rich mineral kingdom. What it does next is, having exhausted its energies in the mineral kingdom and gone as far as it can to produce variety, it then moves on and uses the same processes that it has produced in the mineral kingdom and produces an organic version of them. And we call that the plant world. You know, like I said, we're not going into details because the details will be very demanding between these two kingdoms. But we can, it is laid down. We can go into them. And then elsewhere in other talks, I've gone into them much more deeply than I can here. You just have to trust me with the fact that everything you see in the vegetable kingdom, all the patterns, you can see their origins in the mineral kingdom. The way crystals grow, the way the plants grow, but where crystals grow with rigid structures, where the molecules line strictly, in plants the molecules are lined in a different fashion and they're flexible. But when Mahat is doing this in the vegetable kingdom, another pulse of Mahat has come behind and he's occupying the mineral kingdom. Right? Because the plants need the mineral kingdom in order to grow and to form. So plants are minerals in a plant form. Later, when Mahat moves to what we call the animal kingdom, animals are plants and minerals in an animal form. All the patterns are the same, except now they become more elaborate.
And eventually, that's what we have.
Eventually,
minerals
the human kingdom comes along, yeah. But by the time Mahat has moved into the human kingdom, a pulse of Mahat following behind is occupying the animal kingdom, and another one occupying the vegetable kingdom, another one occupying the mineral kingdom, and three more occupying the elemental kingdoms. Because every kingdom relies on the other kingdoms. It's a symbiotic existence. You can see, for instance, the similarity, the development of the circulatory system in human and animal bodies, where you've got the veins and the lungs expiring and inspiring. In plants, you've got veins in leaves, haven't you? And you've got this expiration and inspiration, and you've got this photosynthesis with the sun. These are systems which are the same as in animals and humans, but are much more simplified at that level. When it comes into the animal kingdom, they are made more elaborate, and they're built on and refined and refined. And in the human kingdom, they're refined again. Now, here is something that will explain something that I'm saying, because when the pulse of Mahat, divine consciousness, mind, was in the animal kingdom before we reached the human kingdom, we didn't take animals to the same level that they are now. When we left that kingdom, the animals are much more basic. We entered the human kingdom and we've been working on the human form. Meanwhile, another pulse occupied the animal kingdom and has continued to work on the material it inherited and make more and more sophisticated animals. Similarly, so is the plant kingdom, because the giant tree ferns are now being replaced by all these wonderful things that we see around us, and roses and flowers.
So, what about us?
So, a little ditty now is that we say in occult parlance that the spirit, talk about divine mind really, but spirit is unconscious in the mineral kingdom, dreams in the vegetable kingdom, stirs or awakens in the animal kingdom, and becomes fully conscious or self-conscious in the human kingdom. So what has happened now is that this fragmentation has taken place. We've ended up in the densest point of matter, the mineral kingdom. From there, my heart builds more and more complex and sensitive forms in order to express and to experience. It's no good if it just stays static. When it moves to the vegetable kingdom, it produces even more complex forms, and it has a relationship. Look at plants. They have this ability to attract insects and pollinators. Mm-hmm. They have their own sort of little communities of plants, and it's a struggle for survival because some plants will dominate others and so forth. It has to evolve strategies to survive. This is all part of the evolving process. In the animal kingdom, you get social groupings. You know, animals actually have friends. They have family groups. They have herds and flocks, and their own sort of inherent wisdom. Their own instinctive behaviour, which helps them to survive. And they learn. They're able to learn the best way to do a thing and the best place to go and so forth. But they're still very rudimentary. But they're so much more sophisticated now than the minerals and even the plants. So the life that's inhabiting these creatures is in a vehicle which is far more sensitive and far more able to express itself amongst its fellows and have a relationship with its fellows, and far more able to experience a world from a higher point of view. When it moves into the human kingdom, it goes up another step. Now, what do you think is the difference between the animal bodies of the animal kingdom and the animal bodies of the human kingdom? Because we're all said and done, these are animal bodies. They may be superior animal bodies, but they're still animal bodies. We call them human bodies because we occupy them. But you put them on a butcher's slab, there's not that much difference between a human being and a pig. So what do you think is the difference then between the human and the animal? Consciousness, yeah. Awareness, yes, absolutely, yes, awareness. There's a greater awareness, isn't there?
Ability to think.
Ability to think. Well, animals do think, but you're very close, because what I'm searching for is a special kind of think.
Will.
And it is inspired by will. And this is the kind of thinking that goes on at the higher levels of mind, whereas the animal world and the lower human kingdom only concerns itself with survival. So we call that aspect lower mind. It's all one mind really, but it's the mind, the part of your mind which is orientated towards physical life, the five senses and the emotions. It's tied up with emotions. The higher side of mind is actually facing the other way, if you like, into spirit, and it's part of the spiritual triad. And it's that aspect of mind that humans have that animals haven't had awakened yet. They've got it, but it's not awakened. Now what awakens it in human beings is the first logos. We have the third logos who made all the material. We have the second logos who organised it all into forms and vehicles and consciousness. And then we have the first logos, which is will, purpose, which now flows in from its own plane, meeting the returning life waves that are evolving into the human kingdom, flashes down and enlightens the higher mind, sparks and wakes up higher mind. And higher mind is where your imagination is. Higher mind is where you can suggest things to yourself. You can pose a question. I'm not talking about a question of what's to eat, which most of it. I come across that question several times in a day, and I usually ask a certain person, and it's get it yourself. No, it's, you see, if I was an animal, I'd only be concerned with where the next grass is. There's some nice grass, and I'd be eating the grass, and that's fine. But as a human being, I look at the grass and I think, food, yeah, but what can I do with it? Perhaps I put some cheese sauce with it, or perhaps I saute in a bit of... There's a difference there, isn't there? I can be creative about that bit of grass, that bit of food. And you see, human beings, because they've got this higher mind awakened, for the first time in its entire creation, we have arrived at a being that can actually question its own existence. You know, that's what we're doing here, isn't it? We're questioning our existence. We're saying, what's it all about? Where did we come from? What are we then? You won't find a bunch of sheep going, what are we? I don't know, what do you think? Oh, well, I think we just will factories, really. You know, human beings will actually ask that question, and have been asking it for centuries. Descartes actually thought about it and said, well, at the end of the day, I'm thinking about it, therefore I am. At least I know I am. But what he is, he never came to a conclusion on. This is an amazing thing, isn't it? Because this knowledge has been known right back to Atlantis and Lemuria. But you need to have you need to come to a certain level of mental awareness and agility to be able to even understand the question, never mind the answer. Because you find that in the opening series of the Human Kingdom, the earliest stages, humans didn't ask those kind of questions. Or they maybe was in awe of things, which is a step up from animals. You know, they would sit. Maybe you can imagine the human beings sitting around the campfire outside the cave at night with the dark sky, because there was no street lamps, was there? And looking at the stars and thinking there was eyes looking down at them, because they see animals' eyes reflected in the campfire. And then they think, oh, look at all those animals up there. Get there. What if they come down here and eat us? You know? So they were thinking, but they had nothing. They hadn't got the mental capacity to start thinking in terms of perspective and all these other things and distance like that.
And it wasn't so long ago that they thought they'd fall off the edge of the world.
Yes.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
It's not long ago.
Some people still think that. There's a flat Earth society. It still exists. Yeah. They've never been on. They've never been on an EasyJet, of course. They've not got a passport.
What's actually happened? I've got a question and I don't know how to formulate it.
We'll spit it out, we'll sort it out, yeah.
Yeah. When one can be in a certain space and look at a rock and see the alive, that it's absolutely alive, you can see the spirit in the rock. Yeah. The same thing can happen when you look at plants, and it's like as though they've got their own radiation and they're coming up. What is actually happening to...
I'll tell you what's happening, and it's a very good question, Ruth, actually. Very good question.
The plant or the rock, and because you've experienced that every time you look at a rock,
it's not the same anymore, is it?
It's not the same, even though it looks flat.
Yeah.
The awareness is there, but it isn't, but it is alive. Because
these things have to be triggered, you see. It's like, if you could get back into the mind of an animal, and you can actually do that in some circumstances, you can actually combine convergent minds with an animal, and then you see the world from an animal's point of view. And when you do that, you see a world that is beautiful, actually, and where it's like all one. There's no great meaning to it, but there's a connectedness to everything. That's the main thing. Animals don't feel isolated. When you come into the human kingdom, the first thing that happens is the consciousness within a human being feels totally isolated. And this is why I said right at the beginning that evolution in humans, from human terms, actually starts with the human kingdom. But in cosmic terms, it starts with the mineral kingdom. Because it's only when Mahat reaches the human kingdom that it starts to question things and starts to have the choice. Because when will comes in, apart from vivifying higher mind, it brings in free will. It means that human beings can do exactly what they want, providing they've got the power to do it. They don't have to just concern themselves with survival. They can concern themselves with destruction as want. They can concern themselves with killing and destroying. They can concern themselves with painting and poetry. All things that animals don't have time for because you can't eat them. So it's this influx of the first logos, will, that gives us free will. And because of that, we tend to become so isolated as individuals, because this free will, this quickening of the mind in human beings, actually makes us individualized. Animals are far more group conscious than we are. It's said that in the animal kingdom proper, several animals of a type will have one common soul. And it's only when they reach the top of the evolutionary ladder in animal terms that they start to split out into one soul per animal, and that is when they enter into the human kingdom. So when we get into the human kingdom, we are actually individual souls, and we're individualized. Right? Any early human activity that tends to keep us in herds, or the herd mentality, which still around today, actually. A football crowd, it's a herd mentality, for instance. People in Tesco's are herd mentality. People watching Coronation Street, herd mentality. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's because that's our origins from the animal kingdom. That's a self-protection mode. If everybody's doing it, we're all right. But if it's only me doing it, maybe it's dodgy. You see. But what happens is, as we get more self-assured and more aware, we become more individual within the herd. So you can see this with animals. The more domesticated animals, in the flocks and in the herds, you get individuals. You see the individual characters developing. I've got 4 hens at home, each one's different. But, you know, it's harder to see in wild animals, I suppose, than it is in more domesticated animals. Anyway, the point is, in the human kingdom, there's this isolation to begin with, and we are very much individuals. We've become very selfish, self-concerned, and very self-centered. So the default mode of humanity is selfishness. We have to evolve out of that. And this is where our evolution takes off, because we're talking about now the many becoming the one again. And you say, how can that happen? Well, it only happens when you're passing through and beyond the human stage. Because what we're learning at our higher levels of awareness is to cooperate with each other. We did that to some degree in the animal kingdom. You see examples in the bees and the ants and things, they cooperate. Yeah. But we have to do it now with all this incredible awareness that human beings have. And we stop killing each other, stop starving each other, stop keeping each other in ignorance. We can wake up to the fact that this is the global village now. This is one world, really, and we are one people. We're not black, white, yellow, blue, pink and red. We're just humans. And we're a diversity of types and of varieties, because we're expressing in every way we can what it is to be humans. Just like animals and all the different kinds are expressing what it is to be animals. But we should be celebrating that difference, not picking on each other because of it, not putting each other up and down because of it. This idea of some people being filthy rich and other people being starving, that's not spiritual. You know, we have to evolve out of that. And we will gradually evolve out of that. But we've still got a long way to go in this cycle before we get back to that state of oneness again. We get glimpses of it on the way, like you're just saying there, Ruth.
I can. What's coming to me now
Yeah.
is that it's like a recognition
Yeah.
of that part of consciousness.
That unity.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the same as
Yeah.
when I'm looking and that things happen, it's the recognition of
The
what's
recognition.
gone.
Because it's the first logos, you see, which is the spiritual will, which is where everything is one. Because the first logos is the purpose behind it all.
Mm.
It's the central point from which everything has occurred. So when you align yourself with that, you align yourself with everything.
Mm.
And whatever you're looking at then becomes, as you say, it all becomes in tune.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't see yourself separate from it anymore. You do. You know you're separate, but you also know you're part of it. And that's the amazing thing. That's the magic of it. I think, when we were very primitive, before we got this sophisticated mind, we did feel that. But as our minds evolved and we got more clever and smart and more selfish, we closed down to what suits us. And we lost this connection, this awareness of our connection to everything. In occultism, it's said that every single atom is connected to every other atom.
Mm.
Every single being is connected to every other single being. This is a web of the universe. So there are atoms out in space somewhere. If there's a line of connection to you, and this is amazing. You see, when we have this oneness experience, we usually have it on a local level. So if you're in a woodland or by the seashore and you go into this oneness and you look around and you say, wow, this is amazing, I am that and that is me. But you're not seeing Mars, you're not seeing Alpha Centauri, you're not seeing the other side of the universe, because your level of awareness is still limited. But given time, given enough evolutionary time, your awareness will expand. You see, and then the whole process of this, the whole reason behind it all, which is what we have to come to, is because it is not just your bodies that are evolving, the minerals, the vegetables, the animals, the human bodies. It's not even just your emotional self that's evolving and your soul and your mental capacity. It's your spiritual spark that's evolving into becoming a flame. And that's the reason why it's doing it.
But with it all comes humility.
Yes, humility, because how can you feel that you're something superior to everything else when you realise you are that everything else? Mm. It's like, in the Theosophical Society, the first object is to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood. So you can't look at another racial being and say, oh, you're less than me, because you're the same as him. You're part of the same creation. As your awareness wakes up to that connectedness, you realise that all life, you are all life. If you put some aspect of it down or harm it, you're actually harming yourself. And this is the dawning of awareness that we're coming to now. But don't ever make the mistake. Well, you can if you want. It's not for me to tell you what to do. But the fact is that everything is evolving because the whole purpose of the thing is for spirit to evolve. Spirit has got these latent capacities, really, which are divine and which are the measure of a god. But they're not at the beginning, they're just their capacities, their potential. But after it's gone through this incredibly, what may seem tiresome process over eons upon eons of time, evolving and evolving, the spirit is waking up these latent capacities, and it is becoming aware on its own plane like never before. That spark is getting a flicker of flame is getting higher, till it's expressing itself as a divine being with the power of a god. And that's why we say Theosophy, the wisdom of the gods, because it was previous humanities in cycles so long ago we can't even think about them, that have been through this process, then overseeing the process so that other sparks can go through the same process. You could say at some point there was probably one divine being, but over all these cycles upon cycles, there must be more and more of them. And you know, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but even so, if you were the one God, as it were, and there was nothing else and nobody else, you'd be a bit lonely, wouldn't you? If you could find a way to reproduce yourself, you could have a community of yourself, you could interact. But here we go back to the same thing. It's the same pattern being repeated. So if we're doing that, then that's what the Absolute, the Divine, is doing also. Because we're not separate to that. This is the key. Whatever is going on, we're part of it. And if we're doing it, everything else is doing it. Or have done it and learnt the lesson, we still got to learn. Or we're going to do it because we're not evolved to it yet, but somebody else has done it, something else has done it. You see, the amazing thing about what we call Theosophy, the perennial wisdom, is that once you get a grasp of these cycles and these principles and patterns, you can see it all then. All you have to do is apply your mind to any bit of it, apply the same patterns and principles, and you can see how it works. You may not know all the details of it. You may want to spend another 3 lifetimes working out how Maha actually gets all the way down to the physical plane. You can if you want. But the principle is that it's heading that way, then it's heading back the other way. It's a cycle. And looking around you, everything moves in cycles. Remember we said that at the beginning a few weeks ago. Nothing moves outside cycles. Nothing goes in a straight line. It's all cycles. And those cycles are spirals. And spirals are parts of other spirals and so on.
I used to be fascinated with the spiral patterns that prehistoric people.
Oh, his shells and things.
Yeah, no, the actual carvings on the stones, and then I realised that I think what they were trying to tell us was, it wasn't a flat circle, it was a spiral.
It was a spiral, yes, that's right, yeah. Yeah, so you look at the cycle of the zodiac, for instance, 26,000 year cycle, isn't it? So we just entered Aquarius now. That means 26,000 years ago, or thereabouts, 25,600 years ago, we were entering Aquarius then. So you say we've come full circle. Actually, we've come full spiral, because we're not the same creatures now, 26,000 years later, as we were then. We are, but we've modified ourselves somewhat. And even the Earth, which is spinning around the Sun, which is a spiral, and even the Sun is moving at the same time, and that's going around the galaxy. So the whole thing is spirals moving within spirals. I think in the Bible it says wheels within wheels or something like that. So just to finish off then, a few questions that are relevant to this course material that you're on now. Forms become complex because they evolve from more simple forms to more complex forms. That's what evolution is, from the simple to the complex, from the insensitive to the sensitive, from the ignorant to the wise. All that is evolution. And what is the destination then of this evolutionary process? To return back to the One, but now in full consciousness. And what is the means, the modus operandi, which by which all things evolve? Slightly more obscure, but we have covered it. What are we here to do? What are we here to?
To evolve
by
experience.
By experiencing, yeah. So you see, at the end of the day, there's no right and wrong. There's no failure or success. It is all experience. If you tell yourself this when you've got a pain, you say, well, I'm experiencing this now. I'm not dying. It's a different experience. It does help a bit, except toothache's another matter. And having a baby apparently, but I'm not. And you will come across the term in your studies, ever becoming. Ever becoming means the spirit is always going through this process, outwards and inwards. We said in Cosmogenesis, the out breath of Brahm, and then the in breath of Brahm, As the breath comes out, all things become manifest. As the breath is drawn back in, all things return back to the one again.
But not to be forgotten.
Not to be forgotten, to be remembered in another creation. And the results of evolution in terms of consciousness is that consciousness expands as a result of the experience it goes through and becomes divine and spiritual in its own nature. It unfolds that capacity from within itself. And our lower nature as human beings is overcome, if you like, or improved upon by the awakening of higher mind, which is a spiritual attribute, the will of the Logos. It infuses us with the purpose of creation. But it's something, you see, people used to say a few years back, I remember people saying, oh, well, we have all the truth within us, you see. We don't have to read books, or it's all within us. Well, yes, it is. But the trouble is, it's buried within us. And it's implanted within us from the first Logos. But you need the experience, the reading, the learning, the cooperating with each other and so forth, and the thinking, in order to access that information. You will not get it as a divine right. You have to, it's there for you, but you have to access it. And what happens then, as you progress in your understanding of all this, when you come across new ideas and new facts, or you're starting to get the message of something, it clicks. And you know you already knew that, but you didn't know where you got it from. And why does spirit evolve? It evolves because it's compelled to do so, because that's the nature of the whole process, is to evolve. And one last question which you'll come across in your course: which parts of creation is destined to become perfect?
Everything.
Our spirit.
All parts. There isn't a single thing in creation anywhere that isn't destined at some point in the future to become absolutely perfect as a divine being. When we say perfect, we mean fully realised. Because the divine sparks at the beginning of their journey, they're perfect. There's no blemishes in them, there's nothing wrong with them. But they've not realised their potential. So when we say perfection in spiritual terms, we mean having realised all our potential. That's perfection. And each phase, each cycle, has a certain level, which is not really our destiny, but it is the culmination of that cycle. All elements within that cycle that don't quite reach that fulfillment at the end of that cycle pass on to a cycle coming behind and complete it then, because all elements must complete that perfection for that cycle, whether it's a plant, a human being, an animal, or an atom, or a mineral. They all have their designated goals to reach, and they will reach it, because if they don't reach it in one go, they'll reach it in the next, and so on. This is why we have more than one life. You know, if in a perfect sort of world, an ideal world, we'd be born, grow up, sort it all out, become divine, and go off into some kind of cosmic heaven. But we don't. We're born, we grow up, we learn a few things, we do a lot of harm. You know, we take 2 steps forward and 6 steps back, we get into trouble. So we have to have so many lifetimes, because each lifetime we don't actually reach that potential of human potential. But we're not expected to in one lifetime anyway. But we are expected to in the full cycle. And most of us will reach that perfection. The few that lag behind are because they entered the human kingdom much later than the rest of us. And it's not their fault, they haven't had the full turn. See, animals transferring from the animal kingdom into the human kingdom, there's a sifting going on, a process going on, and at some point the door is shut, because there's not enough time by any means left in the human cycle to get anywhere properly. But the ones who came in rather late and got through, there wouldn't be enough time reasonably to expect them to reach the full potential. But nevertheless they get as far as they can, and then they come into the next human life wave, and they actually then happen to end up leading the life wave, because they've had a head start on everybody else. And so you get this term, those that are last, later will be first. Those that are first. Well, there we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.